aesthetic might be the most important part of an artist's album. There's actually a lot of cases of a certain album maybe wouldn't have done so well if it wasn't for the aesthetic. When we look at the actual music, it might be mediocre, but the aesthetic bumps it up to a higher standard. I look at the recent Tyler the Creator album. While I'm not saying the album's mediocre by any means, it's great, but would it actually be as highly regarded and praised if it wasn't for the aesthetic as well? There's so many artists like Tyler the Creator where the aesthetic is almost just as important as the music. It can transcend the people and the listener and how they view the music. If you look at Chromacopia, his newest release, Tyler the Creator I'm talking about, you picture that black and white setting, that green font, and you're really immersed in this world of Chromacopia, the album. And if he hadn't done any of that marketing and any of that aesthetic building or world building, like if you just listen to that album, you might have a completely different vision in your mind of what that world looks like. I think Chromacopia is a great album nonetheless, even if it wasn't marketed in the way it was, but it helps to really get a remembering of that album. Like when you look back at Chromacopia in 20 years, you're gonna remember that black and white aesthetic, the green font, all of that. You're gonna remember this world that he created. Aesthetic transcends just the music. It can be even in a real life setting with merch, marketing, and even concerts, how you want to present that album in a live setting, and music videos like I mentioned. So aesthetic is almost more important than the album in certain cases. And in my mind, world building and aesthetic is basically the same thing when it comes to music. I think album covers honestly probably the most important part of aesthetic when it comes to albums. You look at the album cover and then you press play and you get immersed in that world, whatever it is the artist is creating. And like I was mentioning earlier, aesthetic can be what you remember an album for. There's so many cases that I think of where I think of a certain album from an artist and I remember the aesthetic firstly before even the music, and I remember what that looked like, what that era looked like for that band or artist. And it could be fun for an artist as well to record an album and then really dive into the aesthetic, because in most cases, like when you record an album, you're not really thinking of the aesthetic first. You're thinking of the music, obviously, as you should, and then after it's you create this world. So songs that didn't have this aesthetic before now have this new life and this new meaning. I actually think when you first drop an album, it doesn't have to have a perfect aesthetic at first and a set in stone aesthetic. I think you can build off of this after the album releases, with the music videos, with the concerts, and then people will remember the album with that. Like I was just saying, it takes on this new life when it comes to releasing music videos for the album, or even going on tour and presenting it in a live setting. Aesthetic is a visual representation of what the music is, and I think that is, again, almost just as important as the music itself. I'm gonna emphasize this point again. I think album covers are the most important part of this. I think artists don't even need to release music videos, market the album in a certain way, even go on tour. If the album cover does a great job of capturing a certain aesthetic, I think that's all you really need. Overall, I think aesthetic and visual representation of the music you're hearing can make an album go from great to masterpiece. So yeah, that's just kind of my thoughts. I think marketing, branding, merch, all of that kind of stuff can add to aesthetic. Concerts, music videos, all of that fun stuff can add to a great aesthetic and great visual representation of the music you're hearing. And there's so many cases where an artist will make a good album, but by marketing it and putting it in a visual media can really transcend it to a different level and a different experience for the listener. So let me know. This is an interesting question. What is your favorite album aesthetically? It doesn't have to be your favorite album of all time. Just like what album really thought captured you aesthetically and resonated with you in the visual media. So yeah, that's just my thoughts. I'm trying to hit 1,000 subs before the end of the year, so let's make it happen.